Why do Europeans dislike it when white Americans identify with their ancestry? Because it's weird that you claim to be Italian when you were not born there, don't speak the language, never been there, and you say that just because maybe somewhere in your family tree 200 years ago a person came from Italy. And that's a unique thing that is done by people from the USA. The whole American continent from Canada to Argentina is full of immigrants, and that obsession with "I'm German" is only in the USA. As a non-European, it's not Europeans who dislike it. It's more or less the majority of the world. We're not mad about anyone identifying with their ancestry. It's the misunderstanding a lot of diaspora have about the implications of heritage. I think Americans like identifying with their heritage because they view American culture as the default modus operandi and not exotic. Whereas to the rest of the world, American culture is very visibly American. We can see the ways in which our diaspora are very different from us that they themselves can't see. We are basically watching someone from a different culture claim to be more similar to this than they are. Sure, there's some similarities, but Americans tend to underestimate the role nationality plays in shaping your culture, often more so than ethnicity. Also a failure of communication. Americans use those terms to implicitly refer to ethnicity, which is fine. We do that in my country too sometimes. But when speaking to non-Americans, or speaking on international spaces such as the World Wide Web, you can't continue to use regional definitions and not expect others to get mad about it. "I'm Irish" means, "I am from Ireland" in most countries outside the US and Canada. And a lot of North Americans don't account for that fact when speaking to others. There's also a racist element to it sometimes. There's a lot of stories from Black Irish people being told they're less Irish than a white Irish American, which is unequivocally false. If you grew up in Ireland, doesn't that make you Irish? Even if your parents are from Somalia? Sure, you have another culture in addition to Irish. But you're still Irish, and anyone who says otherwise is racist. You're still Irish even if there are racist Irish people who say you aren't. Culture isn't passed through blood. Americans tend to forget that Europeans have married and had kids across countries millennia before America even existed. You are not the only ones with heritage stemming from a different country than where you were born. The difference is that Europeans associate their heritage with where they were born and grew up. Let me give you a personal example. Half of my family immigrated from Germany to Denmark about 150 years ago. The other half were the native Danes they married and had kids with. This does not make me German. I am Danish. My parents are Danish. My grandparents are Danish. My great-grandparents are Danish. Yet in America, people still claim to be German if their family immigrated from Germany 150 years ago. Why? When do you start being Americans and stop being Germans? Genetically, I have significant ancestry from England, France, Germany, and Scandinavia, and yet I wouldn't dream of claiming to be English or German. I am Danish. I was born here. I grew up here. It's my first language. Why wouldn't I be Danish? Because we are Americans. And to a European, our American culture is very noticeable, while our connection to the European culture our ancestors came from is often tenuous. Many ex-Americans don't speak the language of ex-country. For example, most German Americans are not fluent in German. A lot of the cultural traditions we keep are from a long time ago, from specific regions of that country, and have changed over the decades. For example, a lot of Italian-American culture is from southern Italy in the late 1800s or early 1900s and has become its own thing now, different from modern Sicilian culture. This is perhaps one of the more interesting TooAfraidToAsk threads I've read. I'm enjoying reading everyone's perspective. I'm also Chinese American, but I actually grew up in China, so it's a little different. Because you have no connection to the culture. Americans with Norwegian ancestry tattooing a bunch of Norse runes that have no meaning anymore. Because they think they are Vikings is just stupid and embarrassing. Because the ancestry means nothing if you don't have any personal connection to it. My family originates from Ireland, but they came over here before Teddy Roosevelt was president. I've never been to Ireland. I don't know anyone from Ireland. I don't know anything about Irish culture except the stereotypes you get from movies. And so it would be completely nonsensical for me to be proud of being Irish when I'm absolutely not Irish. I'm American. It's more a language difference than anything. When Americans say, I'm Irish, they mean, I have Irish heritage. When Irish people say, I'm Irish, they mean I am culturally Irish and I grew in Ireland. Being Italian, German, Irish, whatever is about culture, not bloodline. To me, this idea of being of nation X generations ago is in some way fairly racist. Like I'd consider you German if you'd be born here or were raised here or when you have a German passport. But that's it. The rationality of one's grandparents doesn't say anything about oneself. Because it's wrong. You are all Nigerian. You need to identify more with your true ancient roots. Because they're not? If Frank from Chicago comes and tells me he's Spanish too, my great-grandma came from Galicia at 5 and never returned there, never knew anything about the country, language, culture, etc., but yeah, I'm Spanish. I'll eye roll so hard I'll have to go find my eyeballs in the couch. Getting social validation from your genes has been kinda looked down upon since World War II. One aspect that bothers me as a European. Certain Americans have this idea that Europe is a collection of unchanging mono-ethnic blocks that never had any trade or immigration. They're your RPG origins that give you racial bonuses. German, +2 drinking, +4 discipline. Italian, +4 nonverbal communication, +3 bada bing bada boom. That ignores the fact that European countries are living, changing cultures that do not adhere to the stereotypes anymore and have always been in cultural and genetic exchange with each other. And on top of that, many proud hyphenated American ancestors came to the US before their country of origin even existed. True of many Germans, for example. Of course, it ultimately boils down to the idea that post-World War II people in Europe do not conflate nationality with genetics anymore, unless they're being racist towards recent immigrants. Which means the American definition of nationality being part of your blood. Except American, of course, look pretty racist as well. I'm 3/4 English, 1/4 Greek. But in reality I'm 100% white Australian. I have no connection to Greek culture. 'Cause while my Greek side is biologically there, culturally my mum's side is Anglo 'cause she's adopted. And on my dad's side some Povo miners from West County, England moved to Australia in the 1800s 'cause they needed work. So whatever my ethnic roots, I've absolutely no real connection to being English or Greek more than I choose to have via media consumption or decisions on where to live. By the media consumption logic, I'm American Australian more than anything because the US puts out way more media. Or perhaps I can claim to be German, Italian Australian 'cause I've learnt German, studied in Germany and Italy. 'Cause at least I have connections with Germany itself or Italy that go beyond bloodlines long since untied from the country, are just media. But again, in reality, I'm obviously not American, German, Italian nor English, Greek Australian. I'm just a Melbourneian. And that's fine. Sometimes they claim to speak for us. Like, as an Irish person, I find this offensive. Quote, and then you ask where they're from and they say, Utah. Also, it gets kind of ridiculous sometimes when they claim to be Swedish because one of their 32 great-great-great-grandparents came from Sweden. I don't hate it for the most part because I know what they mean. I'm of X ancestry, but it is often irritating. For example, I'm Polish. Polish last names are not easy to spell or pronounce, and most Polish Americans completely butcher their own last names. There's a video of the former CEO of YouTube, Susan Wojcicki, who actually even holds Polish citizenship because her dad was born in Poland, educating people how to pronounce her last name. I saw the headline. I was like, oh, how cool. She takes a stance of people pronouncing her name correctly, like East Asians or Indians do. And then you watch the video and of course she pronounces it the English way, Wojcicki, instead of the Polish way, Wojcicki. I feel that if you can't even pronounce your own ethnic last name correctly, maybe you shouldn't claim to be of that ethnicity? I do get where this comes from, though. They look for some sort of identity and they can't be proud of being white, like other groups are proud of being black, Latino or Asian, because that is monopolized by horrible people. So they resort to the ethnicity of their ancestors even though there's not much German, Polish or Italian about them anymore. A couple of reasons. Firstly, it's just stupid. You're not from there, and have no cultural connection to that place or culture. Saying that you do is plainly lying. It's the most obvious form of cultural misappropriation. Secondly, it's actually pretty racist when you think about it. The implication that your ethnicity determines who you are, more so than the culture you grew up in, is an extremely prescriptivist notion. Keep in mind, most old world countries are much more diverse than a lot of Americans realize. If you go to Germany, for example, you will meet people from every ethnicity you can imagine. But as long as they were born and raised there, they are still German. Most Germans will fully accept them, and those that don't are definitionally racist. Thirdly, it's just annoying. You grow up as part of a culture, and someone who doesn't know anything about it, who may not speak the language, and who has never even been there claim to be as big a part of it as you are. It's incredibly disrespectful, and it just puts you in an awkward position where you don't know if you should call them out on their lie or not. One final note. It's not just Europeans who hate it. I was an exchange student in South Korea, and all the Korean students got along well with the students from Europe and Asia, and even the white or black American students. But they couldn't stand the Korean American students for claiming to be part of a culture they barely understood. It's my experience that those yelling the loudest about being X have done one of two things. The first is the American family that has been American for multiple generations, well over a century, and have little to no cultural ties to their proclaimed nationality for bonus points they add in a lazy stereotype about their character. The second type has done some genetic testing and found some tiny sliver that suggests a relatively small amount of Y genetic heritage. They glom onto the one heritage they like the look of, no matter how small, and ignore the rest, meaning they place far greater importance to one aspect of their genetics over the others, for fairly obvious reasons. This leaves a somewhat unpleasant taste in the mouth. For the avoidance of doubt, I'm not saying that every mixed heritage American does this, rather those who make the biggest deal of it fit into one of these two camps. Want to add that, at least my experience in the South, the old people felt it important to tell the stories of how we got here, etc. There remained a nostalgia and pride for the home country that trickles down through the generations. I remember family from Sweden calling on holidays and have the actual auction papers of the family farm in Sweden. Dad's side, my great-great-grandmother Wallace. Mom's side, had a milk pitcher brought from Scotland that I have in my kitchen today. So while I don't identify as Swedish or Scottish, I do like knowing where my family came from and it being honored. I can only assume it seems offensive because we're not Irish, German, etc. We're American. I'm a pasty ginger and people love to ask, "Are you Irish?" And my stock response is, "No, but my grandmother was."
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.